The massive space station called Concordia floated in the darkness like a giant crystal flower. Its clear walls reflected the pale light from the moon below. Inside the station, Ambassador Kim Jai-woo walked through the long corridors, her black boots clicking on the smooth floor. She wore her best navy blue uniform with a small Earth flag on her shoulder. Jai-woo had traveled 3 weeks through space to reach this place. She was here for the most important meeting in the galaxy's history. 12 different alien species had come together to talk about peace. They wanted to decide who would control the Outer Rim, a huge area of space filled with valuable planets and rare metals. The main meeting room was enormous. It looked like a giant bowl turned upside down. The ceiling was made of clear glass that showed the stars outside. Jai-woo felt very small as she entered the room. Everywhere she looked, she saw creatures that seemed impossible. The Zephyrians stood tall like giant birds. Their golden feathers changed colors when they felt different emotions. Right now, their feathers were bright blue, which meant they were calm and confident. Their leader, High Delegate Vextar, had wings that could spread 20 feet wide. His voice sounded like beautiful music when he spoke. Near the center sat the Crystalline Collective. They looked like walking diamonds, their bodies made of living crystal that sang soft notes when they moved. When they talked to each other, their bodies glowed with different colors and made sounds like wind chimes. The hive minds from Sector 7 were the strangest of all. They looked like large insects, but each one was connected to millions of others back on their home worlds. When one spoke, it was really thousands of voices speaking together as one mind. Jai-woo found her seat in the human section. It was much smaller than the areas given to the powerful species. Next to her sat Lieutenant Park Myo, a young officer with kind eyes who carried her papers and helped translate the more difficult alien languages. As Jai-woo looked around the room, she noticed something that made her worried. 3 groups of aliens sat far away from everyone else. These were the newcomers, species that had just learned to travel between stars. The Verdanians looked like walking trees with bark for skin and leaves for hair. Patterns of light moved across their bodies like fireflies when they were happy or sad. The Trilaxians came from water worlds. They wore special suits filled with liquid that let them breathe. They moved like they were swimming even in the air. Their bodies were clear like jellyfish, and you could see their organs glowing inside them. The Corvani were small and gray, with big eyes that helped them see in the underground caves of their home planet. They spoke in whispers and seemed afraid of the bright lights in the meeting room. High Delegate Vextar spread his magnificent wings and began to speak. His words were turned into different languages by small machines that floated near each delegate's ear. "Welcome, friends from across the galaxy," he said, his musical voice filling the room. "Today we gather to bring peace to the Outer Rim. For too long, our species have fought over these rich territories. 300 star systems wait for our decision. Countless worlds full of resources that could help all our civilizations grow strong." Jai-woo watched as beautiful pictures appeared in the air above them. The holographic display showed the Outer Rim, a spiral arc of the galaxy filled with green planets, asteroid belts full of rare metals, and gas giants that could provide fuel for spaceships. But as she studied the images, Jai-woo began to notice something strange. The 3 newcomer species, the Verdanians, Trilaxians, and Corvani, already lived in many of these systems. These were their home worlds, their colonies, their space. She looked over at the Verdanian delegate, whose name was THYSS. The light patterns on his bark-like skin were moving slowly and had become very dim. In her briefings before the trip, Jai-woo had learned that dim lights meant the Verdanians were sad or afraid. The Trilaxian representative floated in her water suit, but her normally graceful movements seemed stiff and worried. The Corvani delegates huddled together, their large eyes darting around the room as if looking for escape routes. "These negotiations will create a new age of cooperation," continued High Delegate Vextar. His golden feathers had shifted to a deeper color that meant satisfaction. "Each species will contribute their strengths. Each civilization will find their proper place in the galactic community." The word proper made Jai-woo uncomfortable. She had studied Earth's history carefully in school. She knew what happened when powerful groups decided what was proper for weaker ones. As the opening ceremony continued, Jaiwa noticed that the three newcomer species were not being asked to speak. Their translators were older models that often made mistakes. Their seating was arranged so they faced the major powers instead of sitting as equals in the circle. Lieutenant Park Miho leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Ambassador, something feels wrong about this. Look at how they've arranged the seating chart." Jaiwa nodded quietly. The more she observed, the more worried she became. This was not looking like a peace negotiation between equals. This looked like something much more dangerous, a meeting where the strong would decide the fate of the weak. 3 days had passed since the peace talks began. Ambassador Kim Jaiwoo sat in her small room aboard the space station, feeling more trouble with each passing hour. Through her window, she could see other spaceships bringing supplies to the station, but her mind was not on the view outside. Lieutenant Park Miho sat at the tiny desk in her room. He was reading through all the papers from the meetings on his electronic tablet. His face looked worried as he scrolled through page after page of notes. "Ambassador, listen to this," Park said, pointing at his screen. "The Zephyrians use the words administrative guidance 23 times a day when talking about the Verdanians. They never once said the Verdanians could make their own choices." Jaiwa stopped pacing around the small room. "And what did the Crystal people say about the Waterworld aliens?" "The Crystalline Collective keeps talking about optimal resource management. Whenever the Trilaxian planets come up, they make it sound like the Trilaxians are too stupid to use their own resources properly." Jaiwa felt a cold feeling in her stomach. She had spent the morning in what they called smaller voice sessions. These were supposed to be special meetings where the less powerful species could speak freely. But what she saw there made her very angry. She had watched Ambassador THYSS of the Verdanians become dimmer and dimmer as each new proposal was read aloud. The light patterns on his bark-like skin, which should have been bright and moving like dancing fireflies, had faded to almost nothing. It was like watching someone slowly die inside. The Trilaxian representative had also changed. Her graceful swimming motions had become jerky and mechanical. Instead of the flowing, beautiful movements that were natural to her people, she now moved like a broken robot. The small gray Corvani delegates had stopped speaking altogether. They just sat in their corner, their big eyes filled with fear and confusion. "It's the same pattern every time," Jaiwa said, sitting down heavily on her bed. "The big species talk about helping the small ones. They use nice words like guidance and cooperation and mutual benefit. What they really mean is control." Park nodded and pulled up another document on his tablet. "Look at this proposal from yesterday. The Zephyrians want to help the Verdanians by taking over all their mining operations. They say the tree people don't understand modern extraction methods. But the Verdanians have been mining their worlds for thousands of years," Jaiwa replied. "Their methods are different, but they work perfectly fine for their needs. The Crystalline Collective is even worse," Park continued. "They want to optimize all the Trilaxian water worlds. They plan to build huge machines that will change the entire ocean ecosystems. They say it will produce more resources, but it will destroy everything the Trilaxians have built." Jaiwa stood up and walked to the window again. In the distance, she could see one of the Verdanian ships. It was grown rather than built, looking like a giant tree branch that could fly through space. It was beautiful in its organic curves, so different from the metal ships of the major powers. "They're going to erase them," she said quietly. "Not with weapons or war, but with paperwork and treaties. The Verdanians, Trilaxians, and Corvani will still exist, but they won't be free. They'll become pets, or worse, slaves who think they're being helped." Park looked up from his tablet. "Is there anything we can do? Humanity is small too. We only control 15 star systems. The Zephyrians alone have over 300. Jaiwu thought about her grandfather. He had lived through the Japanese occupation of Korea many years ago. He told her stories about how his father had refused to change his Korean name, even when the law said he had to. Her great-grandfather had been punished for this, but he never gave up his identity. Grandfather always said that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to cooperate with something wrong, she said. Even if you're small, even if you can't stop it completely, you can refuse to help make it happen. The next morning, Jaiwu attended another private session with the smaller species. She watched as a Zephyrian official explained how they would modernize the Verdanian tree cities. The plan involved cutting down most of the ancient trees and replacing them with metal buildings that looked just like Zephyrian cities. Ambassador THYSS's light patterns were now so dim they were barely visible. When he tried to speak, his words came out as barely a whisper through his translator. "We have lived in harmony with our trees for 10,000 years, he said. "They are not just our homes. They're our ancestors, our history, our soul." The Zephyrian official's golden feathers shifted to a patronizing yellow color. "You will learn to appreciate modern conveniences. Your children will thank us for bringing you into the galactic community properly." That word again, properly, as if there was only one right way to live, and it happened to be the way that made the powerful species even more powerful. Jaiwa looked around the room at all the major species nodding in agreement. They thought they were being generous and helpful. They could not see that they were destroying entire civilizations while claiming to save them. She made her decision right there in that room, watching Ambassador THYSS fade like a dying star. The 5th day of peace talks began with music and lights. The great meeting room was decorated with banners from all 12 species. High Delegate Vextar stood at the center podium, his golden wings spread wide like a magnificent bird showing off. His feathers glowed bright orange, which meant he was very pleased with himself. "Today we make history," he announced, his musical voice echoing through the chamber. "The Outer Rim Accords are ready for all species to sign. This agreement will bring peace and order to 300 star systems." Around the enormous room, holographic documents appeared in front of each delegation. The papers floated in the air, glowing softly and written in each species' own language. Ambassador Kim Jae-woo looked at the Korean text that appeared before her, but the words made her feel sick to her stomach. The language was fancy and diplomatic, full of important-sounding phrases. But underneath all the pretty words, the meaning was simple and horrible. The outer rim would be divided up like pieces of a pie. The 3 newcomer species, the Verdanians, Trilaxians, and Corvani, would become protected territories under control of the bigger, more powerful species. Jaiwa looked across the vast room to where Ambassador THYSS sat with the other Verdanian delegates. The light patterns on his tree-like skin had become so dim they were almost invisible. It was like looking at a person who had given up all hope. Next to him, the other Verdanians sat perfectly still, their leaf hair drooping sadly. The Trilaxian representative floated in her water-filled suit, but she no longer moved with the graceful swimming motions that were natural to her people. Instead, she hung in the water like something dead, barely moving at all. Her body, which should have glowed with bright colors, had turned a dull gray. In their corner, the small Corvani delegates huddled together like frightened children. Their large eyes, made for seeing in dark underground caves, blinked rapidly in the bright lights of the station. They whispered each other in voices so quiet that even their translators could barely pick up the words. High Delegate Vextar began to read the treaty aloud. His voice was proud and strong as he announced each section. Article 17. The Verdanian tree cities will be administered by the Zephyrian Empire for a period of no less than 200 years. The Zephyrian government will have complete control over resource extraction, planetary development, and population management. The words hit Jaiwu like physical blows. 200 years of occupation, complete control, population management, which was just a nice way of saying the Zephyrians would decide how many Verdanian children could be born and where they could live. Article 23. The Trilaxian ocean worlds will undergo optimization procedures under crystalline collective supervision. All native marine ecosystems will be restructured to achieve maximum resource yield. Jai will close her eyes. Restructured ecosystems meant destroying everything the Trilaxians had built over thousands of years. Their floating cities, their coral gardens, their sacred breeding grounds. All of it will be torn down and replaced with efficient mining operations. Article 31. The Corvani underground networks will be expanded and modernized under joint hegemony Zephyrian oversight. All tunnel systems will be mapped and optimized for mineral extraction. The Corvani lived in beautiful underground cities carved from living rock over millions of years. They will become glorified miners in their own homes, digging out well for their new masters while their ancient art and culture disappeared. Jaiwu thought about her great-grandfather, who had refused to bow to occupying forces even when it meant punishment and hardship. She thought about all the Korean resistance fighters who had chosen dignity over safety. She thought about every moment in human history when someone had to choose between going along with evil or standing up against it. The decision formed in her mind like a crystal becoming clear. She didn't plan it. She didn't think about the consequences or what would happen next. She simply knew what she had to do. Kim Jaiwu stood up in an enormous chamber. Her movement seemed very small, but in the sudden silence that followed, it felt as loud as thunder. She gathered her papers with slow, careful movements. She tucked them under her arm like she was just cleaning up after a normal meeting. Then she turned toward the exit and began walking. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floor. In the vast space of the amphitheater, each step sounded like a drum beat. 12 different species watched her in confusion, anger, and surprise. Some of the aliens made sounds that the translators couldn't even turn into words. She walked calmly and steadily, not looking back, not explaining herself. Behind her, she could hear whispers starting to spread through the room like ripples on a pond. The sound of her footsteps was the only clear noise in the growing chaos. High Delegate Vextar's voice cracked as he called after her. His golden feathers had turned bright red, the color of anger and confusion. "Ambassador Kim, where are you going? The Accords require unanimous agreement from all attending species. You cannot simply leave." Jaiwu paused at the doorway. The exit was just steps away. Behind her, hundreds of alien eyes watched and waited. The moment stretched like a held breath. She turned back to face the assembled delegates, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Home," she said simply. "Humanity will not help legitimize this theft." The word theft hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The great chamber was so quiet that Jaiwu could hear her own heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. High Delegate Vextar's golden feathers turned deep crimson red as he spread his wings wide in anger. "How dare you!" he screeched, his musical voice becoming harsh and ugly. "Humanity controls barely 15 star systems. You are insects compared to our empire." The crystalline collective began making discordant sounds like broken glass falling on metal floors. Their crystal bodies flashed angry red and orange lights. "The human speaks of theft?" their spokesperson chimed. "We offer civilization to primitives, and they call it crime." Around the amphitheater, the other major powers joined in the outrage. The representatives from the hegemony worlds pounded their fists on their desks. The hive minds from Sector 7 buzzed with the angry voices of millions of insects. Everyone was shouting at once, their translators struggling to turn alien rage into human words. But Jaiwa's simple action had broken something much more important than diplomatic politeness. Across the chamber, she saw Ambassador THYSS slowly raise his head. The dim light patterns on his bark-like skin suddenly flared bright green, the color of hope returning to life. The change spread to the Verdanian delegation like wildfire catching dry grass. One by one, the tree people's bioluminescent patterns began to glow brighter. Their leaf hair, which had been drooping in defeat, lifted up as if touched by a fresh breeze. Ambassador THYSS stood up from his seat. His translator, which had been barely working during negotiations, suddenly came to life with clear, strong words. "The human is right," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber despite the chaos. "This is not negotiation. This is division of stolen property. The Verdanian tree cities formally reject these accords." The Trilaxian representative suddenly came alive in her water suit. Her gray, lifeless form began to glow with beautiful blue and green colors. She moved with her natural swimming grace for the first time in days as she rose from her position. "The Trilaxian Ocean Commonwealth stands with our Verdanian friends," she announced, her liquid voice rippling through her translator. "We will not sign away our children's future for the comfort of foreign powers." Lieutenant Park Miho, who had been sitting quietly beside Jaiwa's empty chair, stood up as well. He closed his tablet with a sharp snap that echoed through the room and tucked his papers under his arm, copying his ambassador's movements exactly. The The small gray Corvani delegates looked at each other with their large, dark eyes. For days they had been too frightened to speak above whispers. But now, the smallest of them, a young female named Kess, climbed onto her chair so she could be seen over the tall desks. The Corvani Underground Federation also rejects these terms, she said in her tiny voice. Our tunnels are not for sale. Our mountains are not for rent. High Delegate Vextar was now so angry that his feathers were cycling through every color of rage, red, orange, black, and back to red again. You cannot do this, he shrieked. These accords have been negotiated for months. Billions of credits have been spent. Treaties have been drafted. But the rebellion was spreading like cracks in a breaking dam. Some of the smaller species who had been silent during the negotiations began to whisper among themselves. The representatives from the mining guilds looked uncertain. Even some delegates from the medium-sized civilizations seemed to be reconsidering their positions. Jaiwu watched from the doorway as Lieutenant Park walked calmly toward her, his boots clicking on the floor in the same steady rhythm she had used. The sound seemed to encourage the newcomer species even more. Ambassador THYSS approached the central podium where High Delegate Vextar still stood with his wings spread in fury. The tree person's bioluminescent patterns were now blazing so brightly they lit up his entire section of a chamber. You speak of bringing a civilization, THYSS said, his bark-like face somehow managing to show dignity despite having no human features. But civilization cannot be imposed from outside. It must grow from within, like a tree growing from its own roots. The Trilaxian representative added her voice, speaking in the flowing, liquid tones of her people. You promise to optimize our oceans, but optimization for what? For whom? Our seas are already perfect for us. We do not need your improvements. Young Kessa the Corvani spoke last, her small voice somehow carrying clearly through the chamber. You want to map our tunnels and expand our networks. But our tunnels are not just passages. They are our history, carved by 10,000 generations of our ancestors. You cannot improve what is already sacred. The major powers tried to restore order, but their voices were lost in the growing commotion. Smaller species that had been silent for days were suddenly finding their courage. The careful diplomatic structure that had taken months to build was collapsing like a house of cards. Jaiwu felt a strange mixture of pride and fear as she watched the chaos unfold. She had not planned to start a rebellion. She had simply refused to be part of something she knew was wrong. But sometimes she realized that was enough. Park Miho reached her side at the doorway. Together, they turned and walked toward the docking bays where their ship waited, leaving behind the most important diplomatic meeting in galactic history as it dissolved into beautiful, necessary chaos. 6 months after the Great Walkout, Ambassador Kim Jaiwu stood on the observation deck of a space station that had never existed before. This new station was called New Harmony, and it floated in the outer rim territories like a symbol of hope made real. The station was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of being built from metal and glass like most space stations, New Harmony was grown and shaped by cooperation. The Verdanians had contributed their bioarchitecture, living walls that cleaned the air and provided food. Trilaxian fluid dynamics created beautiful water channels that flowed through the station like rivers in the sky. The Corvani had shared their mining techniques to create incredibly strong building materials from asteroid rock. Jaiwu watched through the clear walls as work crews from 17 different species labored together on the station's expansion. A Verdanian tree person worked alongside a crystal being from the collective, while a small gray Corvani directed a group of humans in installing new equipment. It looked impossible, but somehow it worked perfectly. Captain Park Miho, he had been promoted after the peace talks collapsed, joined her at the viewing window. He carried 2 cups of real coffee from Earth, a luxury that was now traded freely throughout the Outer Rim Alliance. The news reporters from Earth want another interview, Park said with a smile. They're calling your walk the step that changed the galaxy. Some historians said it was the most important diplomatic moment since humans first met aliens. Jaiwu shook her head and sipped her coffee. She still felt uncomfortable when people called her a hero. I just got tired of watching the same old mistakes happen again. The original peace talks had completely fallen apart after she left. The major powers had tried to force the smaller species to sign the accords anyway. They used economic pressure, threatened to cut off trade, and even moved warships to the borders of the newcomer territories. But something amazing had happened. The smaller species had stood together. They formed what they call the Outer Rim Collective, an alliance of 17 different civilizations that refused to be bullied by the bigger powers. Humanity had played an important role in this alliance. Earth's history was full of stories about resistance movements and people fighting against occupation. Korean freedom fighters, African independence movements, Native American resistance. All of these experiences had taught humans how to survive when facing more powerful enemies. The humans shared their knowledge freely. They taught the Verdanians about guerrilla warfare that could be fought in space. They showed the Trilaxians how to use their natural abilities to hide ships in ocean planets, where the major powers couldn't find them. They helped the Corvani turn their tunnel networks into defensive systems that were impossible to attack. But each species had also contributed their own unique strengths. The Verdanians' biotechnology could create living spaceships that repaired themselves and grew stronger over time. The Trilaxians' understanding of water and liquid systems led to new types of engines that were faster and more efficient than anything the major powers had. The Corvani's deep knowledge of rock and metal created mining techniques that could extract resources from asteroids that others thought were worthless. Something interesting happened today, Park said, checking his tablet. A group of young Zephyrians requested permission to join the Outer Rim Collective. They said they're tired of their empire's old ways of thinking. Jaiwa wasn't entirely surprised. Over the months, she had noticed that not all members of the major powers agreed with their governments. Many younger aliens had grown up with different ideas about cooperation and respect. They watched the Outer Rim Alliance working together and wondered why their own civilizations couldn't do the same. Through the viewing window, she watched a small human cargo ship dock next to vessels from a dozen other species. The crews that came out to unload supplies worked together like they had been friends for years, even though they looked completely different from each other. Her communication device chimed with an incoming message. It was from Ambassador THYSS, whose bioluminescent patterns were now bright and healthy again. His message said, "Today's mediation session about the new mining rights on Kepler 442F is ready to begin. Thank you, friend Kim, for showing us that sometimes the most powerful diplomatic tool is the courage to walk away from a bad deal." Jaiwa smiled as she read the message. The Outer Rim Collective had chosen humans to serve as mediators in their disputes, not because humans were the strongest or smartest, but because they had experience with overcoming occupation and building coalitions between different groups. She finished her coffee and straightened her uniform. Outside the window, the stars seemed brighter than she remembered. The galaxy felt more hopeful, more full of possibilities. Her simple walk out of a diplomatic meeting had indeed collapsed the peace talks, but it had also opened the door to something much better, a peace built on respect instead of domination, on cooperation instead of exploitation. As she prepared for another day of mediation between species who were learning to be equals instead of masters and servants, Jaiwa thought about her great-grandfather's stories. Sometimes, she realized, the most human thing you could do was refuse to accept that might makes right. Sometimes walking away from a bad situation was the first step toward building something better. The galaxy was changing, one small act of courage at a time.